very, very local level, again, because I think, as academics and as people who are looking at this in a certain kind of perspective and trying to analyze and understand it, the Cuban people that I work with, and I will specify that, the people that I'm working with, I mean, the embargo is this thing that's been going on from people who, who were born after, after the 1960s, 1970s. It's their everyday way of life. It's not that it's imposed and then it's lifted, right? This is the reality of what it is, and it's almost this weird mystical thing that is super saturating the news, in which case, and they get inundated by news about the United States and what's going on every single day. And when I talk to the people that I work with, and especially in Guantanamo, they're amazed that we only hear about Cuba once in a while. And I guess when I say we, I'm talking about not necessarily Cuban Americans, who are very much part of a different kind of reality, especially if there's family, it's a consciousness that's different, but kind of the mass population of the Americans who only hear about Cuba when something's going down, right? When Obama gives a speech, when there's somebody who's put in prison, when there's a bomb, and this whole kind of internet bringing down certain things and that being a big issue. But then again, that drops off until he's released. You hear about Milagros, and then maybe 6 months later we finally hear about him again. So this kind of reality that we're talking about for the local people in Cuba, that is, in certain areas, and also in Havana, it's an everyday life sort of reality. And when I was down there in February and we're talking about this, mostly what I got was, I'm asking questions and they're asking me questions. It's kind of raised eyebrows and like, almost there. Okay, well, we'll wait and see, because we've heard all this kind of, Clinton came in, a lot of things happened, and there was a lot of promises. And a lot of this is that we will see it and we'll believe it when we see it. So it's about action and it's about actual change, not about us talking about the lifting of the embargo, which may not do anything for a long time for most Cubans who are living in Cuba. It'll be a big revolutionary move for us here for a while until something else happens in the world and it goes out of the news, right? But for people living in these local places, it's not something that is going to be a big change in their lives until it is a big change in their lives in a real physical way.
So, I have a question. President Obama didn't necessarily lift the embargo. He just basically opened diplomatic relations. He can't lift the embargo. So, in many ways, it's again this metaphor of what could happen, what will happen, and the craziness that gets involved in trying to figure that out. So, what will it take to actually, and anybody can answer this question, to lift this embargo? What does it take to do that? Because I think that we're under this notion here in the United States that somehow everything is fine and we have a relationship, but it's not, we're not supposed to.
So the history here is important. The embargo was originally a presidential action, but it was codified in the law by Congress. So what would it take? It would take the same thing it takes to pass a budget, a miracle, right? This is not a working legislative body. This is also a country, the United States, that is politically much more divided and much more polarized than it was however many years ago 1959 was. So you're not likely to see a really easy move in that direction, short of a pretty big political change.
Or it seems that the direction in which all this has to go is that an increasing number of Republican legislators have to understand and have to appreciate how constituencies who matter to them have an interest in the lifting of the embargo. And that's a process that's underway, right? So I think that's probably where the key sort of, I think, factor has to be. And that's not unthinkable, right? And part of it that probably has to sort of also be in play is the increasing sort of letting go on the part of, again, that same constituency, that same population of legislators of the old logic of the Cold War, right?
Mavis can answer this better. I don't mean to take your job of asking questions, but long before President Obama, actually going all the way back to President Clinton, the embargo, the pro and anti-embargo sides were already bipartisan on both sides.
Right.
So it's really not a Republican Democratic issue so much as it's a local political issue in the great extent.
In a way, it's a family feud, is what it is. It's a family feud. And there's a wonderful book about it being a family feud called Cuba Confidential by reverse everything back to the way it was before. But there's also the fact of all of us. And sometimes when you open a door, it's really hard to close it. And I think that's what's going to happen. Polls have shown, and there have been something like 8 polls taken since December 17th. Polls have shown that there is countrywide a tremendous support for the changes that the president made. 72%. You know, that's a lot of people. You know, it ranges from 64 to 72, but it's a lot of people who are saying, yes, it's time for this. Let's get over this. And then you raise the issue, well, what about Cuban Americans? You know, where do they fit in that 72%? Well, amazingly, they're right there with us. There's been a trend in South Florida, and Florida International University every 2 years takes a poll of the Cuban American community, and it's been fascinating to watch it, because every 2 years it moves to a larger percentage, and now it's the majority of Cuban Americans in South Florida who want the embargo to end. They want all of us to be able to travel. They can travel now to see their families, but they want all of us to be able to travel. The business community, the agricultural community, the church community, the academic community, the activist community, you name it, we're all there. We're all there. And eventually, the politicians are going to catch up with us. And they're going to see that togetherness is better. And I think that we have a big job to do to educate them and to encourage them. But some of my Republican friends on the Hill who have, yes, it's bipartisan, but they're more Democrats than our Republicans, who are supportive of this. And my Republican friends who are leaders in wanting the embargo to end are saying, Mavis, we've never had this wind at our back like we have now. We have to take advantage of this and, you know, push it over the edge. So I'm choosing to be optimistic.
You know, I want to say, and I'm not going to talk about the embargo, but in terms of the statements that were made, right, and kind of the opening of the door or the possibility of this then being the next step, simultaneous statements in Cuba and here. So that the simultaneity of this kind of authoritative statement is very important. And a performance studies scholar looks at this as, what does this declaration mean? Because a declaration is not lifting the embargo, right? But there is a promise made, and there is something from the highest authority, at least the highest symbolic authority of the United States, that is saying this is what is going to happen, and then it comes back again in the State of the Union. So there is a moment of performance where somebody is promising that something is going to happen, which then gives permission to a mass public that has no information, that has no expertise on Cuba, but there's going to be a voting public, to think about an alternative. So, you know, you have the Cubans and the Cuban American, you have this dialogue, and you have the activists, you have people who are working in policy, consulting and so forth, but then you have the mass of people, and that tipping point is also something that is going to be very important to then move into policy change. So that moment of simultaneous declarations of this is going to now change was, I think, just a very important symbolic act to then see what happens later.
And I think the impact of this discussion of ending the embargo also affects Cuban migration. Because on the table, on the table is, and this is something that immigration reform advocates have been talking about for a really long time. And I don't know how many people know this, but after the revolution, Cubans were given special treatment through the Cuban Refugee Act and the Cuban Adjustment Act, which both basically named Cubans as refugees, and after a year and a day, you were given a residency and provided citizenship. And then when President Clinton came in and said the dry foot or wet foot, which was a whole AM case. But the status of Cubans coming from the island is extraordinary. There's no other migrants from Latin America have been treated with these kind of kid gloves, with this kind of welcome. And so there is this question that perhaps President Obama's declaration, which I think was very smart, we could see that he was going in that direction when he first became president, his first term. One of the first things he did is that he sent members of the Black Congressional Caucus to Cuba. And that was pretty extraordinary, I thought, to meet with Cubans. But he's also thinking about immigration reform. And how do you continue to have a 50-plus year policy that continues to give Cubans who come to the United States these privileges? And so part of that discussion, I think, is also about the state rolling back those privileges and being able to say, we no longer are in this kind of moment. We no longer need to give Cubans this kind of special status, this refugee status. And so that, I think, is a discussion that is about to happen, especially at a time when we have deportations and we have these horrible politics of undocumentation, that this is a discussion that really needs to take place because there does need to be reform on all levels.
The irony of when people talk about second generation being less interested in politics, the irony of that immigration policy, there really is no second generation of Cubans because people have been continuously coming through. So when do you define the first generation? But much more than half of the Cuban population in the United States arrived after 1980 than before the Mario Flip of 1980. And Bill Clinton's 1994, 95, whatever the post-rapture crisis policy essentially has allowed 20, 25,000 automatic visas a year. So these are people who, as Lori said, the embargo was there when they were born. This is a very different, so that's why you're part of the reason you're really seeing the political change in Florida. They were born.
All they know is the revolution. And the money in boat lift, which was in 1980, completely shifts the perception of Cubans and Cuban migrants. And it had a lot to do with the fact that you had Afro-Cubans, people who were under the revolution, women, children, poor, working class, coming in flotillas as opposed to private planes. And that changed the perception of Cubans as an elite migration. And at the same time, again, with the Balceros in 1993 1994, which is then what pushes President Clinton to pass Operation Distant Shore, which is, in my opinion, a very strange policy. So strange. But it's very Clinton, it's this kind of half measures of a policy. So, do I need to explain a little bit why I say that, or do you want people to know what do you want me to explain? Yeah, okay. Before Operation Distant Shore, part of the Cuban Adjustment Act is that, part of the Cuban immigration policies was that the U.S. would, the Coast Guard would actually go into Cuban waters, and if you are on a rafter or on a flotilla, they would have to, by law, pick you up, bring you into international waters, bring you to the United States, and then you would be going through all of the systems or the channels to become a migrant. Before that, with Operation Distant Shore, if you are in international waters, the United States has to pick you up and take you back to Cuba. They cannot bring you to the United States. And if you finally get to the United States shores, you actually have to have 1 foot, right, on dry land. 1 foot, on dry land, so that the Coast Guard can pick you up and then begin the process of making you migrant into the United States. So it's a very strange policy. It was a half measure. But I also think that it was kind of the United States government saying we need to change these policies. We don't know how because the political resolve isn't there yet, but there needs to be a change.
I think it's important to say about the wet foot, dry foot, which is exactly right. If a Cuban's foot touches shore, they're brought in and put on a path to legal citizenship. If they don't touch shore, then they're returned to Cuba. But the Cubans'
home, which is something that involved us here. I was born in Cuba. I came here when I was 17. So for me, unlike for some of you, Cuba is home. However, Cuba doesn't allow me to make it my home. And I think I wanted to share that with you because it's a problem for me and for people like me. I returned, my family never left Cuba. And I couldn't go back. So if President Bush was, as you correctly said, very cruel in not allowing people to go in 3 years, I don't know what adjective I would give Fidel, who didn't allow us to go and see our family for 2 decades. 2 decades. That's a long time. And then when I returned to Cuba, I cannot live in Cuba. I have to leave after 2 months. I cannot work. I cannot own property. I cannot even take the bus. Because the bus doesn't allow me to go because I don't have an identity card. So I just wanted to share with you how displaced I have been by my own government, which doesn't allow me to make my home my home. Thank you.
And let me say something about, this, we've been talking in different ways about this idea of home, but even your statement, sir, Cuba does not allow me to make Cuba my home, that's a
It is
paraphrase, right? Cuba does not allow me.
The
So-
government of Cuba.
I know, but I'm bringing it up as kind of a conversation, right? And if we're looking at what is home, and what is Cubano, and what is Cuban American, and what is the relationship, right? What does this opening up of relationships mean, and who has the power to make changes, right? And who has the authority? So I think it's important to, there's a lot of stories, right? How many of you have a Cuban story? Similar to this? A few maybe. But there's a Cuban story, right? But it's important for us when we're looking at home, this is why this concept is helpful to understand what that means. Cuba is not allowing me to do it, right? So what is that statement going to turn into in the next 5 years or the next 10 years, looking at how the changes are, if there are changes that come about. So I think that'll be an interesting way to go. We probably maybe one more panel question and then open it up. I did want to ask one.
Well, I had a question myself, and in terms of the embargo, I totally agree. I think the embargo is a medieval idea, that we just run the castle and in several weeks it collapses, goes down, at it affected over 50 years. I think it's time to change it, and I think it's all overdue. But the question I have, maybe it has something to do with what Lori stated at some point about the perception in the countryside, that things are going to take a long time to change, is my sense would be that since Cuba has not really had access to a lot of the things that they were used to before the revolution because of the embargo, there's probably this pent-up demand for a lot of things that the Cuban can say, oh, look at what they're having. People go and visit the United States and come here for my relatives, look at all they have. And there will be this pent-up demand, and at the same time there will be this desire by businesses from the United States to go there to Cuba and begin to develop and make money. And so that I think has some implications for cultural changes. And the question is, how do you preserve that identity, that Cuban identity and culture that is there, so it doesn't succumb to all of a sudden this opening up of the spigot that will change the character of something that maybe should not change that quickly. You know what I'm getting at?
Well, and this is the nostalgia that's at the root of a lot of kind of what comments have been, right? Preserving the culture. Here we have a culture that's been cut off from the world, not completely. There's a lot of international document in Cuba that there's a certain kind of understanding and misunderstanding. But it's been cut off in kind of, a lot of the posters and things you'll see about Cuba have to be, suspended in time. And all the pictures of the 1957 Chevrolet that are still running around Cuba, right? So this idea of preserving a culture and what's going to happen when all the Americans come in, when the McDonald's and the Starbucks pull up. And I think that's something that's a problematic part of propaganda, that there's a kind of a drive to preserve, and that was definitely something that's part of the conversation in Cuba as well. How are we going to save and rescue our culture? But that also, there's various sides to that. It's not just the people coming in and doing away with the Cuban culture. There's a whole dialogue terms of kind of home and how are we protecting our home, or is it changing? Who's developing it? Who's the power to decide what the next step is? I mean, that's part of this conversation as well, right? The here and the there, and whose perspective is it, and who has the power to make the next step? It's not just one. It's not just Cuba. It's not just the government. There's a lot of multifaceted levels in that.
I just want to point out, in regards to that comment, is that we have to consider also that a lot of the economy, the Cuban economy, is driven by those remittances being sent from the United States to Cuba, and by the constant travel of Cubans coming from the United States to Cuba. And by constant, I mean sometimes even weekly. And what I'm trying to get at here is that there is a lot of products from the United States in Cuba already. There are people, when I go to Cuba, which I go once every year, when I go to Cuba, they're dressed better than I am. They have things from Hollister, from Express, things like that, because their families here are bringing to Cuba. So this is not a case for every Cuban. I don't seek to speak for every Cuban, but definitely the merchandise, the more global merchandise, is making its way into Cuba through these families that come and they bring the better things to the Cuban.
And it's just those that have families here that take them there. The ones who don't have any family
But
here
then those
don't
things are,
have anything.
but then those things are sold in Cuba as well by this family. Like some people actually make businesses out of this. They buy the clothes here and they sell them back in Cuba for exorbitant prices that you wouldn't believe. So yeah, not everybody has access to this, but what I'm trying to say is I don't want to think that there's like a pent-up desire for all these things when there is actually a lot of them in Cuba already. So, it's not that we don't have access to that.
And the idea of preserving the culture from the outside is, and I don't mean this disrespectfully to your question, but it's not our job to preserve their culture. It's their job to preserve their culture. It's our job to let them do it. It's our job to let them do what they want. And when I say our job, I mean our government, their government. Let the people of Cuba decide what the people of Cuba want.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's really, we have sometimes this discussion of what are we going to do? Well, it's not our place.
Yeah, I was raising the question.
Yeah,
first of all,
that's why I don't mean that as a.
I think as a question about in Cuba itself, that's going to be a challenge. About how do you control that?
Well, that's a really good question for everybody, right? Because that's part of what they're using to commercialize. I'm sure that's going to be what they use it to commercialize Cuba right now. They being, mass media and tourist companies and so forth. And the Cubans themselves also use that. So what is going to happen when that one kind of selling point, ironically, is the thing that's going to be, it'll be preserved. I mean, it'll be more preserved than it would be. That's usually what happens.
And again, I would go back to this sort of the dialectic going on in this conversation around what's exceptional and what's not exceptional about Cuba. Because this is a question you can ask of anywhere where there's a vulnerable and and richly traditional sort of culture that might be under threat from neoliberalism, right? So I think in some ways, if you sort of open it up to the larger context, a lot of the ways that we're answering these questions, we can preserve a lot of what sort of I think makes sense about them, but also there's a way that we can see sort of going forward what these sort of eventualities might actually look like, for better or worse, right? Because again, I'm a very bad Cuban in many ways. I've been told that by mostly better Cubans than me my entire life. So let me just say that. But it's always fascinating to me how these questions do seem to have a kind of if not just a piquancy, right? A kind of urgency when it comes to Cuba in a way that still feels weirdly special. And my first response to it is why? Why? That's not to say it's not special. It's just to say that it's a lot of this is sort of a product of this really anomalous history, and the fact that there's this a major sort of capital with the remarkable sort of architecture of a city like Havana that's in the ways that it still is frozen in the past, right? That's there's something sort of undecidedly unique about that, right? But what we want to sort of say is the thing that we want to do to sort of preserve that or not preserve that. No culture, in the world has ever been sort of perfectly preserved, intact, in the version that it enjoyed at any given certainly all around the rest of the Caribbean because of what happened in part, because of what happened in Cuba for the last 60, 70 years, right? So, so again, that might change too, right? If that's not the way that, it's just not entering into the geopolitical system in any way that looks anything like the one that it left when it left in 1959. And so I think all these questions are up in the air. I think it's an important question to ask, right? And a concern to have. But I think the world, you know, the world that's kind of waiting to welcome Cuba back into is such a different one.
Sorry. I just want to say about this, I mean, about your comment. The other reason that Cuba is special is because a tiny little island led by Fidel Castro has stood up to the United States for so long. And I think that really intrigues people because we have this tiny little island that has nothing, you know, that we have to worry about anymore, right? There's no nuclear arms there, there's no Cold War. But Fidel Castro and now Raul Castro and the governmental structure is standing up and with their arms crossed and not letting the United States have their way. And that, to our kind of political sensibility, is fascinating, right? Because we are the big world bully. I mean, we are. And usually we get our way somehow, and they are not allowing us to do that. And that is something that is very unique.
And they're seen then as a symbol for that kind of ability to stand up to the big power all around Latin America and the Southern Cone. Cuba is lauded for being able to do that. The very first place that Nelson Mandela went after he got out of prison when he traveled internationally was Cuba, to say thank you for supporting us in our struggle.
Yeah, I just wanted to also add that there's also things in since 59 that Cuba has established that intrigue people that are much more on the political realm, like universal health care, universal education, all the way up to the university levels. And these are things that people in the United States don't have access to. And we don't have, it's not like there's health care that everyone has. And so those kind of things intrigue people too. For this little island, it's also, if you know enough about the island and the politics and the embargo and the blockade, how are they able to manage these type of things? And the United States, a rich, powerful country around the world, can't even provide some of the basic human needs to their citizens. So I think that also, not just the art and the culture and these different things, and I agree with you standing up to the United States and not being invaded, which can happen if you stand up to the United States, they will invade you. And so, yeah, I just thought that that's important as well.
So let me play the polemical cynic here just a little bit. First of all, what? Do you want to go? No. No, and it's actually not to disagree with anything that's been said, except that you know, if you really kind of press at this, at a more sort of cynical reading of everything that we're talking about, and again, in terms of uneven sovereignty and in terms of what countries are allowed or not allowed to do or can actually sort of manage to do in the geopolitical context that we're talking about, you know, at some point I think we just have to also entertain the possibility that Cuba never actually did anything. The United States didn't want them to do so badly that they couldn't have stopped it, right? And so to the extent that the U.S. was perfectly happy to let this be the state of affairs for as long as it was, you know, the cynic in me goes, well, that's what they wanted. In some ways, it wasn't what they didn't want, and I'm not exactly sure what to do about that. But I think that it's another way to think about this that again doesn't necessarily disagree with what we've just heard, but I think you know adds another layer of kind of what I hope is understandable cynicism to it. I also don't think that Cuba is a small island. I think among islands in the world, it's actually quite a large island. It's as large as Pennsylvania, and it has what 10, 12 million people on it. That's not you know, that's not Vanuatu. Vanuatu is a tiny island. It's a tiny nation island. So I always balk at that because it's a massive island actually, and it's a significant territory with a significant population.
Somebody had their hand up.
Well, we address the home issue, talk about the elephant in the room. From the home issue, I came alone to the United States when I was 16 because I decided to do so. Okay? Society became very polarized the first few years of the revolution. Some choice, I'm a U.S. citizen, my nationality, I do not know what the Cuban American is. So whenever I hear that, I say, you know, who that is, and what you take, you know, my Cubania is because in that period I became an adult very quickly. I do adolescent things now to compensate. So I didn't have an adolescent. Some of my younger colleagues who derive their Cubania from their parents, they have absorbed it. We have two in Congress, as you know, that absorbed it very well. And you know, you have different perceptions of what home is and different there. Now, the failed ideology and failed economics is the truth that doesn't quite come out. It's so important. The people in the countryside, they know very well what they were doing in Havana hasn't worked because they're still, you know, there and it's very hard. And the only theater troupe that we see is the one that the government sends us, not the one that we might like to see come from Havana. It might be a different one, you know? And that's very tricky at that point because it's government sponsored. It's only one. It might be very nice, it might be relatively good, and some of the individuals within that group may have learned to navigate the system and transmit the ideals of freedom and expression and everything else, but they live in a dictatorship, you know, and they've lived in a dictatorship for a long time. So the people in the countryside know, and those are my Cuban brothers too, and sisters. The issue of wet food and so on, there's push and pull. I mean, how desperate people have to be to jump in a boat, you know, to jump in a boat, you know, it's very desperate. So it's not just a question of pull, it's push too, you know, it's a balance to do with those. It's the human tragedy that's there, you know, without clear, it's there. Those policies, the minute that you have full declaration that it is a failed experiment, that the ideology was simply used for control, and the longest ever dictatorship that we've ever had, then that would be a very useful point. So yes, December 17th was very important because it changes the dialogue. The reality in Cuba is still very sad and very bad in many respects, but that changes the overall discourse. One of the key issues is that the blockade was, of course, unilateral, and it was a question of principle. I hate it when nobody ever mentions that the whole embargo was done as a question of principle. Cuba confiscated without compensation an enormous amount. They started by the foreign property, no compensation except maybe to a few other countries, but not to the U.S., which was the primary thing. At that time, foreign direct investment of the United States, Cuba was one of the countries with the highest concentration of foreign direct investment. So it was all confiscated, and it became very much an issue of what's going to happen everywhere else. So the containment idea of embargo, blockade, whatever you want to call it, it's there. It's a question of principle, no compensation. No country in the history of nations, no country's ever done that to the other. And so it had to happen. And Castro navigated the help from the Soviet Union, but was able to maintain his grip of power for a long time for that. After he lost that, we got lucky in Venezuela now and so on. We've been able to get a few more dollars, a few more barrels of oil, but it's still the productive basis of the economy is there, very there. And one comment is, you know, the preservation of culture. The degree of state control in the Cuban economy was greater than in the Soviet Union. It was there. Cuba actually in the 68 period confiscated personal business by individuals. The guy who had a little tiny store in the corner and managed it himself and sold little things and so on, that became no longer his property. The degree of state control of the economy was greater than any other Soviet or communist country before, even China, as I understand it. Okay? So never seen in any other country in the world such good liquor made out of that fruit. So that knowledge, that culture was lost. It's no longer to be found. Okay? So there's a lot of culture that was lost, and a lot of entrepreneurial culture that was lost, and people who were able to make a living from there. So that's an important culture that hopefully will be reborn at some point in time.
Let me interrupt you for a moment. I mean, I think, and just very briefly, and then I'll be quiet and I'll go on to the next. What I have found in my research is this idea of the preservation of culture. When the artists were going up into the countryside to work with the campesinos, and they were doing basically research to then construct a play and to work with the campesinos, the artists were much more worried about the loss of culture than the campesinos. Altar de Cruz, which is kind of a promesa, religious, more or less religious festival up in the mountains. The campesinos were like, well, we don't have time to do this anymore, and it costs a lot of money, and we have other things to do, and there are other sorts of cultural productions that are going on. But the artists, who are Cubans, who consider themselves campesinos also because they're from this province, saw this as something that they were very concerned with. So who is concerned about this loss of culture? And is it loss of culture, or is it just a natural sort of change in how culture is adapting to its surroundings? And who is worried about the saving of it? Because the Cuban artists were very worried about saving it, and that came through in their art. And as a result, they were funded more by the state because that was a very revolutionary sort of project, right? So it's a really interesting dialogue that goes on between this idea of what's being lost and where we're moving into a new, where the cycle goes next. Is there a,
Just like a response to what he said, it was like, I feel that we should let Cuba decide what they want to do, but also the Cuban government should decide what the people want. Before Fidel, there was another dictatorship, which was Batista, which was a big ally in the U.S. and maybe that's why they got a lot of investments and all of that. I just feel like what it started might have been good, the Castro regime, but it totally changed and we became a dictator. I think we all want the Cuban people to decide what their future is, and it shouldn't be either the U.S. or just one solitary family deciding what it is.
I just want to point out the gentleman in the tie kind of back up what Ricardo said earlier, and this is an important topic to me. I'm a journalist. Journalists spend a lot of time in prison in Cuba. I've met many of them time there, and that makes Cuba just like Azerbaijan and Russia and Ethiopia and a million other countries around the world. We have actually a project going on right now where our students are raising money to create awareness for prison journalists around the world. And that makes Cuba not unlike many other places. And the same way with the push and pull, there are many other places where people come here to the United States. Many other places where people come here for whatever reasons. But again, in that respect, Cuba is not, in those respects, Cuba is not guaranteed, unfortunately.
But also, there is something unique about the situation, even with the journalists like you're describing and quote-unquote human rights activists. And from this side of it, since I'm not Cuban, I look at the United States disposition. And that's another elephant in the room, and especially if you look at the revolutionary Cuba, what were like you were bringing up, what are the conditions there? What were the conditions of people, the level of racism and exploitation and the massacres of demonstrations and things like that under Batista. Now under the revolution, the U.S. policy has been to co-opt Cuban citizens, to pretend that they're human rights activists and journalists actually again, and so Cuba has had to defend itself. It does have control. I'm not saying it's perfect and it doesn't do things wrong in terms of its what it does with citizens, but we also have to know how U.S. policy affects what happens inside the island. So they've had to establish laws in their constitution that make it against the law. Most countries have these laws called treason. And so if you're working with an enemy of your country, then you go to jail. And so if you're taking money from USAID money or whatever, funneling, and you're trying to spread propaganda in the name of being an independent journalist, as they call them, then you can go to jail. If you're trying to act, if you're taking money to, this is U.S. policy. It's not even, I'm not making it up. You can go look it up and how it works. And there are also, we really participation in their electoral, things, in their electoral procedures. 90-some%, unlike the United States, which has less than 50, and only of registered voters are they talking about. The literacy rate is high, and that's a statement for democracy. If 90-some% of your populace is literate, it means that they also can make better decisions to help in terms of policies that benefit their lives. Cuban citizens have the right to national referendums. There's no such right in the United States. Only some states have it in the United States. And then, this is just a little bit of that, because there's a lot about the structure of the democratic process. So it's not just that people are voting for representatives in provinces and locales, and that they're also able to vote about policies, things that, that affect their lives. In 2002 maybe, there was a national referendum about the socialist system, whether people wanted socialism, and it passed. So they made passed a resolution in the U.S. in the Cuban Constitution that said that the socialist system is irreversible, and that it's enshrined in their constitution that they want to be a socialist. And this is the people voted for it. So it wasn't just something that was just imposed on them. These are facts. And so people need to, look at these kind of things and be much more, I think, more, more critical in terms of how we're using words and things like that. If it's a dictatorship, then what way? Is the United States not a dictatorship? I mean, it seems that big money controls electoral politics here, and most people don't even, have faith that these things are that voting here will change conditions in their lives. Here, police will shoot people every 28 hours. A black person is killed by agents of the state, extrajudicially killed. These aren't things that Cubans have to contend with. So I think it's important. To me, I tend to look at Cuba, I tend to juxtapose it to where I live here in the United States and the conditions that we face. So to me, this is a dictatorship too. It's a dictatorship of the rich, and they control things, and that's that's why we don't even have universal health care, education, and they're trying to privatize schools, and all these kind of things happen here that Cubans don't have to worry about.
Concept-wise, right, we have revolutionary, we have whatever the key narratives are of our countries. So in Cuba, you have a revolutionary country, and the definitions and the experience of that. In the United States, we have this idea of freedom and democracy, right, and whatever that means. And everybody here, I'm sure, has an opinion about that. Protecting home, and levels of surveillance, levels of policing, right? So there's all these different sorts of relationships that we can go back and forth, and this is also, I think, why Cuba is very interesting, because it is this direct thing that we are seeing, this kind of communist country that is the antithesis to